Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Before we bring on tonight's guest, I want to share something with you. Quite a few of you who listen to Dogman Encounters don't know I also host a Sasquatch-specific encounters show. It's called Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio. Just like with Dogman Encounters, there are two ways to listen to Bigfoot Eyewitness. You can go to the Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio YouTube channel and listen that way, or you can go to bigfooteyewitness.com/podcast and become a premium member. If you do that, just like with Dogman Encounters, you'll be able to listen commercial-free using the Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio app on your Android or Apple device. To find out more about Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio and how to listen, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com/podcast. All right, on with tonight's show. Tonight's guest was featured on episodes 95, 103, 112, and 133. On those shows, he talked about the multiple encounters he's had with dogmen. For tonight's show, he's come back to tell you about another encounter he had in August of this year. Of course, I'm talking about Dave Leidy. Dave, welcome back.
Hey, Vic. Good to be back.
Oh, it's great having you. For the listeners who haven't heard any of the shows you've done before, please tell them about yourself.
Well, I'm 57 years old, married, no children. I live in southeast Pennsylvania in the cold months and northeast Vermont in the warmer ones. I am at home in the woods and have spent most of my life outdoors. Even though I've somewhat rediscovered what's out there, I'm still an avid outdoorsman, camper, and fisherman.
If I could think of the perfect dogman researcher, I'm pretty sure you would be it. I'm so glad we have such a good ambassador out there doing what you do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You were recently featured on an episode of Terror in the Woods titled Werewolf and Demon in the Woods. Before we talk about what went into creating that episode, I'm going to play the interview we did in episode 95 where you talked about the encounter that show focused on. And here it is.
Back in 2009, it was in October. I remember the date very well. It was my 49th birthday. My wife Lisa and I were very fond of camping, and ever since we met, we have camped just about everywhere east of the Mississippi that has a national forest or a nice state park. We decided that since tent camping was a game for younger bones, we entered into the realm of travel trailers. After looking at many, we decided upon an Airstream. They are really nice and on the expensive side, but we intended to get a lot of use out of it. We got a 25-footer so that we could fit into just about any campground. It has full hookups, but we never really used anything but the electric, and hardly that. Plus, we installed solar panels because we intended to dry camp 100% of the time. I traded in my 250 and bought an F350 because we wanted a little more power towing the trailer. It's an old joke among Airstream owners that you have a $60,000 trailer pulled by a $50,000 truck looking for a free campsite. So, well, as I said, we were older now and we had more resources and decided to go that way. So we embarked on a tour of the East Coast National and State Parks that year, and we would sometimes stay for a week or two in a place, and sometimes we'd spend just a day or two moving around, and sometimes we didn't even unhook the trailer. We just pulled it around with us to use it as a resource. We both have a lot of outdoor experience. I was a Boy Scout and spent a lot of time hiking and camping, either with friends or alone, and I was pretty aware of strange things in the wilds, especially at night, but sometimes in the daylight. I had said that there were some weird places that I had visited. Most were pretty normal, but like I said, the Daniel Webster Forest in Vermont, Pine Barrens, New Jersey, just to name two, were pretty strange. Well, with my wife, we experienced nothing really that strange together, but one particular time, we decided to go to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We had no plan, so we just kind of wung it. And we traveled slowly as usual, staying at campgrounds along the way, though usually state parks, as they seem to be a bit quieter. So we made our way south, and we steered toward the coast. Now, we crossed into North Carolina from Virginia, and we saw that it was getting close to dusk, and we picked out the closest state park, which happened to be Pettigrew State Park near the Picasso Lakes National Wildlife Refuge near Phelps Lake. As it got dark, we passed through a couple of dark towns, and a few miles from the park, we passed through a town called Cresswell. And this was pretty dark, too. I was surprised that there weren't any lights in town. So I stopped along the road. I uncovered my off-road lights so we could see better, and we continued on. Around a corner, when we came into town, there was this big house, and as we approached, we saw about 15 people in the yard, and it was pitch dark. And before my lights came around to the scene, it must have been really dark there, and we looked at each other and thought, well, why would you hang out in the dark like that? But as we went by, they all stopped and stared at us. We went by. It gave us a weird feeling, too. And as I went by, the last guy on the lawn looked at me and said, good luck. I thought, oh, no. Yeah, that's not good. So we got our way down to Pettigrew, and we got there just as the park ranger was leaving. And there was only one other camper there, and they were talking together. The place was kind of wet. It had rained a bit. There weren't many trees except by the lake. It was just kind of swampy. And we asked what it was like there, and the ranger looked at the other guy, and he looked around. He was kind of nervous, and he said, okay, pretty good. I promised to be back at sunrise. And he seemed pretty nervous, and the other guy seemed pretty nervous, and we looked at each other and said, oh, maybe we'll give this one a miss. And the other guy said, well, you're not staying? Well, neither am I. I'm not staying another night. And he got back and started breaking camp. We're thinking, well, that's kind of weird. So maybe it was the right decision. So we left there, and we drove toward Roanoke Island, because we figured, well, since we're so far away from really any state park or where we're going to go, maybe we'll stay in a store parking lot. We often do that. Since there were no other parks nearby and all that, so we're not going to boondock in the swamp, so we're going to try for something in civilization. So we headed down Route 94 and crossed the Alligator River and drove into the middle of the Alligator National Park. So that, again, having lived in Pennsylvania my whole life and camping mostly in the north, the thought of large man-eating lizards were kind of new to me, and I felt a little uneasy just at the reality of that type of predator. So we drove through the night, and we were looking up the park on our phones, and we read about this red wolf. It was a critically endangered species that was reintroduced to the park a few years ago, and no one had seen it in a while. And we were almost to Man's Harbor, which is right on the bridge over to the island, and we saw this dog walking toward us, and we looked at each other, and boy, didn't it look just like a red wolf, and we had just read about that, and it was just so amazing. So I'd say it was about 1 a.m., and we're almost to the ocean, probably about 10 miles out. Driving along, and I hear this loud thunk on the trailer, and I thought, what a place. I really didn't want to get out here. But I decided I should go take a look. So I stopped, and I left the truck running, and I grabbed my .357, holstered it, and walked out. And I went out, and I checked the truck, and I checked the trailer, and I didn't see anything obviously wrong. I thought maybe I just ran over a branch or something. And then I saw a dent in the trailer just below the right taillight. Well, I checked it, and while I was looking at it, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight out, and all the insect noises stopped. And I knew about that feeling, having had that feeling before. And I got a little nervous. I kind of knew that there was something near me, either staring at me or in the area, and something odd. It was kind of like a predator feeling, like a mountain lion, coyote feeling. You know what that is. So I slowly turned around, and I didn't see anything at first. And the feeling got stronger, rather uncomfortable. So I pulled the gun out. I still didn't see anything, but I started to hear some rustling and water noises. And so I focused in the direction of that, and I saw a dark shape behind some scrub bushes. And as my sight sharpened, I saw a familiar shape. It looked like I was looking right at one of my German Shepherds. But this one was reddish black. It was very large. And it had very large ears with looked like tufts of hair sticking up. And they were both facing me like little radar dishes. And it had its front paws on a rock, and it was crouching behind the rock. And I noticed that one of the ears was light gray and bent over a little bit. It looked very out of place for this guy who was pretty much consistently dark everywhere else. So our eyes met, that eyes met feeling again like the one I had had before, but this time it wasn't very pleasant. I got a chill. And what I was looking at, I thought, was the look of a hunter, no emotion, and that kind of scared me. It looked to my left, its right, and moved a little bit forward. And then it did something that really haunts me to this day. I saw a deer do it once, thought it was crazy then. Well, it lurched back onto its rear legs, and then there were these two distinct popping sounds as it straightened up. Well, then I really saw him. He was somewhat muscular above the waist, with hair like a mane around his shoulders. His fur was reddish, though it was dark with black streaks. He had yellow predator eyes, which were, I can pretty much still see as well. Pointed ears, and his paws had fingers and claws on the end, and very long, muscular arms. His lower half was thinner and kind of strange canine legs, and I thought I saw a short tail. I said, wow, this is the stuff of nightmares. I wondered if I was really seeing this thing. And then it made some noise. It was a low growling, and then it looked to its right again. I followed its gaze, and I saw another one. And this one was very dark. It was on all fours and moving to my left. And I thought, that looks like a flanking maneuver. I think it was time to go. And so the one in the front took another step, and he showed his teeth. And I could see them in the moonlight glinting at me. In fact, if I think about it, I can still see them. Well, I backed away toward my truck, and I glanced to my left again, and I still heard the other one, but I couldn't see him anymore. Well, that wasn't good. So I reached the truck backwards, and I saw that the first one had reached the road, and he had one foot or paw or whatever it was on the road. And I took aim at him, and I fired. I was pretty shaken up. So I'm a pretty good shot, and I was aiming at his head. But he moved at the last minute, and I'm sure that I hit him in the shoulder. He didn't react like I thought he would, getting hit with a gun of that caliber. It was almost like I punched him, nothing more. And I had the distinct feeling that I think I just made him mad. But he did stop, and the other one stopped. So I used that time to get in the truck. Honestly, I don't remember getting in the truck. My wife was in there in a state of panic because of the shot, and also because she had really never seen me frightened before, and she said I was shaking. I don't remember getting in. I don't remember putting the truck in gear. I don't remember taking off, but I was, and I was moving pretty well, and the truck was pretty powerful as it was, and always made light of the trailer load. So I looked in my mirrors, and I saw one on each side of the truck in the road, and at least another one behind each of them. And I thought, oh no, there's 4 of them. Well, they stayed with me up to about 30, 35 miles an hour. And then they slowed down, and they just veered back into the swamp and were gone. So I didn't stop or really talk until I crossed the bridge and got on the Roanoke. I pulled into the Mateo shopping center and I stopped. Then I looked at Lisa and I told her what I saw. She said she didn't see anything, but she admitted she was looking at her phone when I was back there. Well, I'm really glad she didn't get out or she didn't see them. I don't think I would have ever gotten her out of the house again. I decided not to go into too much detail because of that. And I just told her I fired a warning shot at a predator. So we were on Roanoke, and we stayed in the grocery store parking lot that night. A lot of businesses allow overnight stays by truckers and campers. They figure that you'll wake up and shop in the morning, and that's usually what happens. I know that Walmart and Cracker Barrel and places like that, they have special parking for trailers, and they just ask that you park so that the store cameras are toward your doors overnight. So we stayed there. We had a pretty uneventful night, except I had some really bad dreams about you-know-what. I kept seeing them really clearly in my dreams. And the thing that kept repeating in my dream, and like I said, it still bothers me, is when I think of them as the actual point in which they stand up. Maybe it's the popping sound. It's like an abnormal move, and they do it anyway. And the eyes, of course, just kind of glowing yellow. I'd seen predator eyes before, but these were different. So they seemed to run faster and maybe quieter on four legs from what I saw. And they seemed to shift effortlessly between four legs and like a half crouch. But from what I saw, they seemed to have to stop completely to stand completely up. At least the one in front of me did. So I woke up from that in a sweat. But we went into the grocery store in the morning, and of course everybody was staring at us, but that's not unusual. So we got our groceries and we came back out. We put them in the trailer. And Lisa got in her side, and I was walking around the trailer on my side, and I saw this truck in the parking lot in front of me, and the driver had me in a dead stare, and it was decidedly unfriendly. So there were several things I could have done at that point, so I decided to ask him what was up. And as soon as I started to talk, he completely fell apart and started apologizing to me. He said that I was a carbon copy of a friend of his, and he thought he was messing with him. And we laughed, and I asked him about the island and the surrounding area, and he told me that the normal tourist stuff and told me about a couple of good restaurants. So I looked at him, and I looked at the rifle rack in the back of his truck, and I decided to ask him about the swamp. When I told him that, he kind of rocked back on his heels and looked at me. He looked around, and he said that he thought he was the only one. Well, we proceeded to sit at the table in the camper and talk about it, and it seemed like he had exactly the same experience twice. His name was Eric. He described him right down to the bent gray ear on one of them. That was interesting. So he told me the first time he only saw one, but the second time he saw two, maybe three, and the second time he shot one. He said he hit it in the chest, and it didn't stop at all. And then he hit it in the leg, and it stopped and looked down. And then they all retreated. Maybe that's good to know. Eric said that they had displayed hunting behavior. He said that he saw them on the mainland when he was out there hunting, and he also said he doesn't go there anymore. In fact, he said that he used to hunt everywhere in and around the swamp, and it seemed to him that since this Dogman thing has come around, he doesn't go hunting, and he doesn't see anybody else going hunting either, so we don't know. So I thought the same thing. I'd seen predators and all kinds of stuff my whole life being out there, but I never saw these guys. But then again, I never really looked for them either. Coyotes, bobcat, bear, mountain lion, gator snakes, gator for him. We all knew them, but we never saw these before, and they were definitely different. He told me that a friend of his was a Bigfoot researcher, and he had been out with him a couple of times, and they said they had a pretty good time doing it, and they never really felt seriously in danger, but since they started seeing Dogman, it's put a real damper on their things, and they seemed that it diminished their activity somewhat. So I bought them lunch, and the three of us enjoyed the lunch, and I didn't really mention it again. Then Lisa and I left, and we went to Fort Raleigh, the north end, and then we went down to Kill Devil Hills, weird name, and we checked out the Kitty Hawk First Flight area. And I started to put the whole thing out of my mind. You know, being in civilization is real good for that. We kept the trailer hooked up, and we acted like hermit crabs for a while out there and traveling trailer around with us. So we stayed one more night at Menteo, and then we drove down to the Outer Banks, and we had a great time. It's a great place. We went between the seasons, and it was pretty quiet. So we drove as far as we could. The road ran out, and we settled down at this campground at the end called Frisco Woods. It was closed, but I called the owner, and he told me to stay as long as I wanted to, and that the electric was on, and that was cool. It was really a nice place. We unhooked the trailer and set up our camp, and we could see the bay and the ocean at the same time. I had a pretty good time, and I was worried of the alligators, of course, and I had Dogmen in the back of my mind, but didn't seem to be any predators on the Outer Banks. So we stayed for about a week, and we headed back. Unless you take a ferry, there's really only one way on and off of the islands. Right before we left the area, we dry camped and hooked up one more time. We were off of Roanoke and onto the mainland near Mans Harbor. And we stayed at a nameless business there on Prairie Dock Road. And we didn't really venture out after dark. Before we went in, the owner told us that we should stay inside after midnight and didn't say anything else, so he didn't have to tell me. So in the middle of the night, I got up and decided to look outside. Never a good idea to look outside in the middle of the night, but I did it anyway because I thought I heard some stealthy movement outside. I didn't see anything, but I did, before I went back, thought I saw two eyes on the edge of the woods, and of course the insects stopped again. They're about maybe 4 or 6 feet off the ground, I could say, from where I was. I could have been wrong. But after a while, they were gone, and the noise started again. If it had been any other time, I would have dismissed it as totally normal. But since the events of the week before, I was really nervous now. So in the morning, we woke up, we thanked the guy, and we hit the road. There was no sign of the creature anywhere, and I was happy about that. The guy saw me looking around, and he looked at me, and he didn't say anything. And I started to say something, and he put his finger up to his mouth. I said, okay, I'm not going to say anything. So we were driving through, and right before, we left North Carolina. We took 64 to 32, and then we were in Virginia back by the Great Dismal Swamp. And we went to Suffolk, eventually Norfolk. A few times I thought I saw some creatures running along the side with the truck, but that was probably my imagination. When I looked, they weren't there. But when I did, right before I left, I slowed down, and I stopped, and I looked back at the swamp, and I almost swear that I saw a dogman in the swamp watching me leave. Now, that didn't make me feel good either. So the experience has made me much more aware of my surroundings. I look over my shoulder a lot. I examine the woods thoroughly at all times. I guess that's good. I thought I was doing that, but I guess it wasn't. So I went about and I researched the phenomenon for a long time. It may seem that I may have opened myself up a little bit, but maybe I didn't. I mean, it must have been there all the time. So after a while, I got brave enough to tell my story to my two best friends, and they teased me a little bit, but they knew me well enough to know I was serious. One of them spends a lot of time outdoors, and his property backs up to a large wooded area on the outskirts of Lake Nakamixon, which is about 30 miles north of Philadelphia. And he started to tell me that he had some strange occurrences on his property. He said he wanted to tell me about it after I told him my story. He thought people would think he was crazy, but now he felt comfortable enough. His property is irregularly shaped in about 20 acres, I'd say. And as I said, it's attached to a large park surrounding a reservoir. The area's got a real long history. It's sacred to the tribe of Native Americans that live there. And there's a bunch of stone structures nearby in the lands, and there's a couple roads named after him. So he began to tell me that over the last month he started hearing strange noises at the back of his property. He didn't have a large fence, just enough to mark the property, and his dogs are actually pretty friendly, so the fence wasn't really meant for them. It's just to mark things out. So he was hearing snarling and baying in the back, like wild dogs. And in the back of his property, he had this shed that he used to process deer, and it was damaged. Somebody had broken into it, but it was scratched and clawed and torn up, and he didn't think that was human damage. So he had repaired it, but something broke in again. So he decided to watch the house with binoculars and see what was disturbing the shed. He thought it might be a bear, but there's no bear in the county. I guess it's not unheard of, but there wasn't. So he started watching, and one night the surrounding forest, of course, got quiet, just that whole thing, and his dogs, who are usually very alert, put their heads down, put their tails between their legs, and ran down the basement. He said, uh-oh. So he was watching the shed with binoculars, and he thought he saw a shadow move. And as he watched, he swore that he saw a wolf-like creature, his words, walking on two legs. So he said he shook his head, and he said the sight scared him a bit, more than anything he'd remember. And he considered going out with a shotgun, but he thought better of it. The next day he went out to the shed, and the dogs seemed pretty normally. Didn't see any damage, but he found some tracks. So he told me this story, and I went out to the house with him, and we looked at the shed. And there were people hiking around and stuff during the day, and everything seemed pretty normal. So that night we built a fire, and we sat in his backyard, and we were watching. And we didn't see anything, but there were a couple of times during the night that insects stopped, and there was that weird, eerie feeling like we were being watched. So I told him I had an idea. I told him to start processing his deer somewhere else. Kind of a pain, but if he was going to continue living there, I think that it might be better. So we cleaned the shed, wiped down with bleach solution, and repurposed it. And after that, the activity kind of stopped. I don't know whether they disappeared, but the activity stopped. We didn't feel it again. So I think he's pretty fortunate, because in my heart, when I had my encounter and what I saw, I think once they were there, they were going to stay. And I don't know, maybe they would follow you home. And that's a real sobering thought. It's strange how you can tell the difference between a Bigfoot, a predator, human, dogman. Each one has a completely different feeling, but the dogman to me holds like a kind of a terror feeling, like the alligator, but much worse. It's almost like an instinctual fear, but I never really saw it on the other two trips or on my friend's property, but my senses told me that it was the same feeling that I had in the Allegheny National Park. I have to say that I've had that feeling a couple times, too, in rather small patches of woods, surprisingly, near Philadelphia. That sounds really creepy, but when you know you're being watched, and I know the feeling now. So, again, I'm hoping that you follow me home. So, we still love to go camping and be out in the woods, but I'm always very wary, even if I don't tell my wife that I'm wary. I want her to relax and have a good time. I'm always armed, something 357 or higher, and she's pretty used to that anyway. We tend to stay up north a bit more, as it seems to be not as prevalent there.
What was the process of filming that show like?
Well, I'm really not quite sure how my 2009 story was found, but the guy I spoke to seemed to know quite a bit about it. He called me and wondered if I wanted to record a documentary about it, and I agreed. From there, I was contacted by a production crew and spent quite a long time in the studio. The time in there was long, and they seemed to have a decent budget.
I really liked that show. There was only one thing that I wasn't happy about, and that's how they portrayed the Dogmen.
I wasn't happy about that either. I didn't like the look of the Dogman at all. But like you said, I guess their budget probably didn't allow anything else. And I was curious as to why they didn't let me use the name Dogman either, because I used it all through the show, but they didn't for some reason want me to say that. There was a couple other things I didn't really particularly like about it, and that was one they had in the very beginning when we were going through Cresswell. They had 4 guys and a dog standing in front of 2 cars with headlights on, and that wasn't really what happened at all. It was quite dark where these people were, and there was like 30 people standing in the absolute darkness. It made it way creepier than what the show looked like. And I have to say this, for whatever reason, they had us in that tiny trailer and a Chevy. It just doesn't compare to the monster Ford, no matter how you look at it.
It's funny you mentioned that. Finding out you're a Ford man, that makes it even more impressive.
Thanks.
Good man. What'd you like most about that show when you had a chance to watch it?
Well, I think they did a good job overall, and it's really hard to nail down a lot of details about a story. I like that the actors at least resembled us. They seemed to understand our love of the outdoors, and they got that feeling of loneliness of the swamp down there pretty well, and my measured reaction to it until I had the bolt. So I thought that was covered pretty well.
Yeah, like I said, I thought they did a really good job. I couldn't see how you wouldn't be happy with the end result, but then again, you're the one who went through that experience, so maybe you would have reasons for not liking it, but it's good to hear that you did like the end result. If you had to go through the filming process all over again, would you do it?
Oh, yeah. I would do it in a minute. I'd like to maybe talk about some of my other experiences. I wonder if they'd be interested in hearing any of the other encounters that we have here. I mean, besides the North Carolina episode, there was 103 in Schwenksville and 112 in New Hampshire and 133 in Northeast PA, and they might be interested in those. I would do it.
You never know, maybe one of the producers who listens to this show might contact you and ask you to do a show on one of those other encounters you've had.
Yep, that would be great, and I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, that would be good. What do you think most people have wrong about what it's like to research dogmen?
Well, it's hard to say what people think. I think that a lot of people see kind of a glamorous side of investigating. I don't know if that's the right word to use or not, but you think about a ton of exciting field work and such, but that does exist, but I really think it's only about 10% of the time that I'm actually doing anything. A huge majority of the time I'm either researching the internet or speaking to eyewitnesses, most of whom do not want to put any of their stories out there. So most of my time is spent speaking to people and trying to calm them down and listen to them as patiently as I can, assure them, of course, that they're not alone or crazy, even if they are, and to let them know they have somebody there that they can talk to. I think it's important. So most of the time is spent talking to people, and very little time of it is spent in the field.
Yeah, it's funny when it comes to researching dogmen, which I don't do. I'm more focused on the actual eyewitnesses, but it is funny how many canards are out there about what it's like to actually do it. I can only imagine what you must go through.
Well, you are out there, and then when you are out there, it is quite exciting, if that's the right word. But I'll say that leading up to it, most of the time is spent researching.
As far as your research goes, what have you been up to lately?
Well, I have been a lot quieter this year than usual. I've not been active as much this year at all, but that is mainly due to life events that seem to have caught up with me. We had to say goodbye to 3 of our German shepherds, which was really rough. And then we've also been taking care of my mother-in-law, who is not doing well at all. And as I said, I've been speaking to eyewitnesses a lot and trying to help them. I mean, it's not that I haven't had a lot of that. I've taken about maybe 12 calls in the last 4 months, but almost all of them have only wished to talk to me alone and keep their stories private. So of those, really only one of them seemed to need any field investigation, and that was near to me.
Well, as you've been updating me since we did that last episode together on all the things you had going on, I'm just astonished you're able to do anything as busy as you've been.
Well, I do want to keep in touch, and I don't want to let people think they've been put on a back burner. I want to keep as active as I possibly can be.
Well, I'm sure most of those people would understand.
Yeah.
You say you feel like you're being recognized when you go into the field anymore. Please expand on that for us.
Well, other than with people, because some people know me, and now that my face is out in the world connected to my name, I guess there's some recognition in that way. But it's a hard one, Vic. It's something that I've been recently just starting to think about. I tend to spend a lot of time with my field work in the same general places, and I've been getting this subliminal feeling that some of the forest entities may recognize me in some way. It's very subtle, but it seems as though my encounters have been of kind of a lower key than I usually would have had. I would have thought they've been sparser encounters, but there always seems to be one, and they seem to be a bit less intense than they used to be. It's very hard to explain. It's true, and it's very hard to explain.
You've gotten quite a few calls from eyewitnesses who had encounters at a place called Dogman. What can you tell us about them and their experiences?
Well, Dogman seems to definitely be a hotspot in this area. It's in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and it's a place that I thought warranted a little bit of investigation this year. I go up there sometimes just to fish, but it's a reservoir, it's a state park, and there's a lot of people that go in and out of there. But I have been getting a steady stream of reports from that area for a long time. In fact, I just got one last week. The thing is, it seems that whatever is there doesn't want to be found. When I go, and I go a couple times a year, I detect the passage of a large animal, but I can't find any evidence. The eyewitnesses, they all seem to say the same things. They notice a lot of mangled small animals left on yards, and they're hearing howling and growling noises that are not coyotes. And they seem to be witnessing what they think are large bipedal creatures crossing distant fields and meadows in the darkness. And when tending their properties, they see strange shadows in the tree line and hear unfamiliar noises. Only one of them has had a semi-close encounter, and all of them seem to be shaken somewhat. So, close encounter in my mind could only have been a dogman from what the guy described. So, I think what I'm going to have to do is mount a serious long-term investigation of the area in the near future and bring some decent equipment with me and see what comes up.
Well, if you do that, I hope it pans out for you. You had an encounter in late August this year. Please tell us about it.
Well, it was late August. We were up in Vermont. We had gone up in the early part of the year, probably around May, and nothing much happened up there most of the summer. We like to go up. We usually take, like the New York State Thruway, get up there because it's nice and green, and we go up and we look around at the trees now, seeing things we didn't used to see before, and we make our way up there. And my wife, Lisa, I got to say, I can't say enough about her. She's super supportive of everything I do, and she helps me a lot with everything. But she had to work. She usually works, and she had to work remotely. So she was doing that most of the summer and left me time to get out and explore the place and the state and the area we're in. So most of the summer was uneventful, and it always amazes me that I hardly ever see another human being anywhere back there for so many hours. It's just a great way to get back there and relax. So it was really a relatively quiet summer, and I didn't receive any reports in the state like I had used to, especially the last year that I was there. I was actually kind of thankful for that. However, I did have one, and to me it seemed to be a rather small incident, but I don't know how you can really say what's small and what isn't, but it was the last week of my stay there. A friend of mine who lives out in the woods told me he had been hearing strange howling mixed in with the coyote yammering, and he thought it was weird. I didn't really think too much about it. There's all kinds of stuff living up there, but he knows that too, so the fact that he even mentioned it was kind of a little odd in itself. So early one morning, I was driving the back roads as I usually do. I was in a place close to the Wenlock State Forest on the border between Vermont and New Hampshire. I was out with my friend Ross, and we were four-wheeling around, getting alternately lost and found. The roads around there, they can be traversed without four-wheel drive, but they're a little unpredictable, so it's a good idea to have a truck with clearance and four-wheel drive and a winch if you can handle that. And I don't worry too much about fuel either. I have two tanks of about 65 gallons between them, so I don't worry about running out. I will say that on this day, Ross, until the end of this day, was a complete skeptic. So the day that I'm saying, we managed to find places that even we had never seen before. They were very remote, and it looked like they hadn't really been logged or even traveled in a long time, and that's odd in Vermont because most of the places had been logged up there. So throughout our drive, I was talking to him about various cryptids, and he was laughing everything off and systematically explaining it all away. And I was actually showing him like to me, undeniable, obvious tree structures and anomalies deep in the woods, which to me could only have been the work of something unhuman. And no matter how woven or how large the trees or how deep the gouges in the wood was, he just still totally unconvinced. It actually seems to me that at times he was almost pleading with me as to how they just had to be natural. So at this point, I let it drop. It seemed that he was getting agitated, and I really didn't really want that. It's not really what I wanted at all. So we got back, we were driving around, and we both knew the area pretty well, but not that particular section. We also knew it was going to be bear season soon, so we kind of expected to see a little activity, but so far we hadn't encountered anything. The trees were pretty thick back there, and it seemed almost like dusk when we were back there, even though it was middle of the day. You could only see a few feet back into the trees, and only really the trails were lit. So I would say we were about 30 miles even farther back into the woods than we were before, and we were in this amazingly dense section. Suddenly, on the road in front of us, we saw this big, large black shape with a high arching back and spiked fur run across the road on all fours. And I say ran, but this thing cleared the road in one bound. It was quick. But we were both watching straight ahead because, you got to watch the road. And Ross says, "Hey, wild pig." "No." "Wait, bear." "No." "Wait, was that a wolf?" And I looked at him, and we slowed down, and we stopped when we were across the road. And I looked at him, and he said, "Oh, crap." I looked at the shape from the moment it went across the woods, and I thought Dogman, since I kind of knew what I was looking at. And I also thought about not stopping because of that, because it could have been a black coy dog, it could have been a coy wolf, might have even been a wolf, but that's not the reason that he said what he said. He said that after it crossed the road and ran into a thicket, well, we both saw it stand up on its hind legs and glare at us. And we both distinctly heard the two loud popping sounds when it stood up, one after the other, almost simultaneously. This was pretty much the same ultra-loud, knuckle-like cracking that I had heard a few times before. It was very unsettling, and Ross looked at me with horror, and then we briefly lost sight of it. If I hadn't had those experiences from before, I might have thought it was tree branches. Still might have been the case, but I'm almost positive it was his legs. Anyway, for better or worse, I completely stopped the truck, and I didn't see it, so I reversed, thinking maybe we could get a better look, and when I had gone back about 15 feet, I realized my mistake really fast. I thought that I hit a rock in the trail, but after that, I saw a huge black shape move off in my right mirror. And I'm thinking, did I just hit him? And the answer came almost immediately. The back of the truck shook, and there was a big slap on the side of the truck, and we heard and saw the foliage being snapped and moved all around. And we heard growling and snarling noises in the brush, and we're thinking, we're in trouble now. But the noise seemed to be moving steadily away. So here's me. I quickly roll up the windows, thinking in my mind that it's like using a piece of paper for a shield, but rational thought was kind of not happening at that point. And I just kept thinking that I should have listened to that little voice in my head and not stopped at all. Anyway, we never did see the one off to our right again, but we could still hear it crashing through the woods and getting farther and farther away from us. And then we both saw the other one still standing to our left with its head above the thicket, just staring at us. Ross let out a weird noise, and he told me later that he thought it was staring right in his eyes. He described the eyes as yellowish amber and very intense. I saw what I expected to see. This guy, I assume male, fit every description of Dogman that I had seen previously. Only this guy had a moosely jet black body from the neck down and was a little bit larger. He had some gray fur on his head and around his eyes. What I saw was the same thing that I had seen before. He had to be between 8 and 9 feet tall because the thickets are about 7 feet high. He had a large body, very large shoulders with spiked fur, amber eyes, and a long snout. His ears were the same on the top of his head with tufts of hair, both facing forward. I thought that he had way too many teeth, and it seemed to me that all of them were sharp. Though he wasn't really snarling, as his mouth was mostly closed, but you could see his long fangs covering his muzzle. He had long, muscular arms and longer claws on the end of longer fingers than I remember. There was also an odor. I never remembered a smell of any kind before, but there was a strong mildew type of smell. Not wet dog or rotting at all, just a very strong, musty or stale smell. I couldn't see his lower half, but I could almost make his outline through the brush. After a few minutes, which seemed like an hour, of looking at each other, just when I was beginning to think of a plan, he took off. He started running off on two legs, dropped down to all fours, and was gone. Here again was another encounter that was not an attack of any kind. It seemed to be some kind of observation in my mind. Of course, the feeling of adrenaline overload was still washing through me, and I was preparing for what might happen. I mean, he was obviously still in close proximity, and I knew there was one on each side of the truck somewhere, and we were deep in the backwoods. I thought, well, at least we're armed, but then I also knew how inadequate and probably dangerous that was. From previous experience, it's better just not even think about physical violence or a weapon or anything else. So we decided to haul it out of there. There was no sense in provoking a worse encounter. We took off down the trail at a decent pace, not flying through or anything like that, and managed to make our way back to the areas closer to the road and parking areas. I didn't say anything for a long time because I really wanted him to talk about his sighting, and besides that, I had already drawn my own conclusions. So we lingered at the parking area for a few minutes, and then we got onto the main road and started back toward town. Ross wanted to keep driving anyway, I think, and he was quiet for a while, but then he started explaining over and over and over again what he saw. He started to ask me questions, and he was trying to make up plausible theories and ideas and explanations. And I didn't press him. I wanted to hear what he had to say, and after he failed to explain it away, I told him to do some research. I told him to listen to this channel, and I don't think he really knew what to say, but I thought I knew what he was feeling. The rest of the day we spent together actually researching and talking about all this stuff, and I think that in his mind the floodgates had really opened up for him, and that was the day my friend Ross was introduced into a larger world. I don't think he was traumatized at all, as I originally feared. He lived in Vermont his entire life and thought he had seen everything. He's a hunter, and now he has several things to think about. Now he has to rethink all those weird instances he had when he was hunting. I can tell you that it did shake him up a little bit, but now he wants to accompany me. I'll tell you, it took about 10 seconds for him to leave all his skepticism behind. And that's really what I've been talking about from the beginning. I can definitely respect everyone's opinion on any given subject, as well as their skepticism. Although, when they see what we have seen, 99% of them become believers almost instantly. I asked him if he wanted to go back there again the next day, and he agreed very quickly. I told him that whenever we entered the forest, we should keep a good attitude about us and continue to respect the woods and everything in it, keeping that thought foremost in your mind. In other words, I wanted him to go into the trees as he always had. I wanted him to have respect, and I wanted him to go in without fear, because I firmly believe that certain creatures can read us empathically. I also said that we probably wouldn't see anything abnormal, and been back there and elsewhere scores of times and never even saw deer. And I thought encounters are pretty rare, so I wanted to say that to him. Well, that night we took our wives out moose viewing in another area, pretty far from where we were. People go out there all the time, and I thought it would be okay. And we sat out this moose viewing hut on Route 105 near Notch Pond Road. We had done this a lot before. Ross and I were extra aware, but it turned out to be a great night, a couple of moose sightings in the wallows. So we were up early the next day, and after a good breakfast, we went out and we spent the entire day roaming around all the deep areas, and we saw nothing but grouse and birds and other deer and things like that. And the deer weren't spooked or nervous in any way, so it seemed that we had just been in a special place at a special time. I mean, we were everywhere back there, even down a few hairy power line roads and snowmobile trails. And we had a pretty nice time, and we looked around and we did some harvesting of some local plants. So, with difficulty and the winch, we actually made it up to the top of East Mountain. Usually that's off limits, but the road gates are open in bear and moose season. It's an old Air Force early warning station, and it's a pretty cool place. Very remote, hard to access. So we went up there and we checked it out, and after a while we slid back down the hill. We were hours back there, and I guess it was starting to get a little dark again, so we decided to call that a day. And on our way home, we decided to try a shortcut through the big bend that we came through, and we found ourselves heading down a particularly narrow and wet trail, which happened to dead end in a bunch of rocks. And I got stuck trying to turn around, even in 4 low. So I decided it was time to let the winch pay for itself again. And that's the thing about four-wheel drive. You can get back into the most beautiful remote places on Earth, away from society and assistance, and then get stuck. So if you're going to make it a habit, investing in quality winch is really a good idea. So we were setting up the tree saver, and I pulled the winch line over, and we were hooking it up. And I was using the gator jaws and synthetic line that I had recently upgraded to. They are much safer and stronger than the steel parts. I saw that Ross was really nervous. He was looking in all directions and starting at every noise. We knew there were normal predators in the area, but that didn't bother us so much. We now knew that something else had made it there, something that wasn't there before, so I told him to try to relax. So, just as we were about to actuate the winch, I heard a lot of thrashing around going on in the thickets. I thought, uh-oh, now we're on foot. This might be a problem. We looked at each other, and I could tell that Ross was a hair away from panicking. I motioned him to try to relax and stay away from his holster, take a deep breath. I figured it'd be okay, and we should deal with it with a clear mind. And the most important thing would be not to run. So we had to decide whether to continue winching or to try to get back in the truck. Well, the brush was moving around, and we could hear thumping like footsteps. So we non-verbally decided to get into the truck, and we started to move very slowly back to the doors. The truck wasn't running, and I knew how loud the diesel would be when I started it. Common animals are really scared of that noise, so I hope that's what it was. As it turned out, as we got near the doors, we watched a big black bear run straight away from us, but there was still noise in the brush. And we looked at each other again and thought, okay, here we go. So now this is the thing. Now that you know there are cryptids out there, you have no idea what's going to happen. Well, we slowly got in the truck, closed the doors, and we sat there for about 20 minutes. Nothing happened. I finally opened my door, and the forest was silent. We got out and went into the brush and didn't find anything. And we started looking for tracks. We found the black bear tracks, and then we found moose. It was a big, heavy moose that left fresh, deep tracks and plenty of scat. So that had to be it. Hopefully. So we continued our winching. We threw all the stuff in the back of the truck to put away later and just got out of there. We got back on the main road without much conversation. In fact, neither of us said a word for 10 minutes until we pulled over in a turnout on 105 just before the Grassfield Airport. And it was then that Ross and I looked at each other, and we both started laughing at the same time because of the big dark stains that we both had on the front of our jeans. And that was pretty much the end of it. That was the extent of my adventures in Vermont. I was always hoping that Dogman was not in my favorite place. This was the first time that I had seen anything in the borders of the state. I had seen stuff in New Hampshire, but not Vermont until that day.
Besides the Dogmen that live there, as you found out the hard way, that sounds like a really neat place.
It's my favorite place in the world. I mean, I've been to just about every state in the Union. I've been to other countries. And of any place I've been in the world, Vermont is definitely my most favorite place in the world.
Well, I can understand why. Considering the fact Ross was a true skeptic before he saw the Dogmen that day, do you think that made seeing one harder for him to deal with than if he had believed in them from the start?
It's hard to say. He was visibly shaken. To his credit, though, I think he held himself pretty rock solid during the whole encounter and looked to take it all in and seemed to be processing it pretty well. As I said before, I can totally respect the person for their skepticism, but when they're faced with something that they cannot explain away, things that we've seen, they lose their skepticism in seconds. Ross went from 100% off to 100% on in about 1 second.
Oh, I'll bet he did. When you have these encounters with Dogmen, Dave, you take notes on them and the details of how they played out. Is that something you did from the start, or did you start doing that after you had your second or third encounters?
I don't think I did that from the very beginning, but pretty soon afterward, when I decided to start researching, I definitely started to put together some notes. And I have a few theories, and that's for sure. Maybe when I put them all together, I can publish them, but that's not really a priority right now. But I do have a couple of thoughts about all of this. I think that they might be emulating a lot of the other creatures that are out there. I think that they may use the green belts to travel in family groups, and we may only be seeing rogue or young males that are scaring us away from them. I think that they're quite intelligent, and I think that they absolutely control the encounter as to whether they are seen or unseen and can read our intentions. It used to be that I rarely saw deer carcasses or skeletons in the woods, but lately I have, and maybe something is cashing in on the deer ogre population.
Yeah, that could very well be. It's hard to say. You've accumulated a lot of theories about Dogman, which you alluded to just a bit ago. Are there any you'd care to share with us tonight?
Well, I was thinking about increased sightings. I think that they may have been here from the beginning, and I think we may be driving them out of the safe places they've been in for however long they have been here. And that may be because of deforestation. It may be because of other things that we're not even really aware of. I think that more and more people are going out there to investigate, and that being the case, I think that encounters may become inevitable. 8 or 10 years ago, Upper Michigan is where we were mainly seeing or hearing about them, but now they seem to be everywhere. There's a lot of people that are terrified to go back in the woods after meeting these guys, and to them I would say that they should start slow and go back in the daytime and work back into it with more awareness and, as I said before, respect for the forest. I think that if these are creatures that have been with us since the beginning, then it seems to me that it's their choice to stay out of our hair, and maybe we should think about doing the same thing.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. You mentioned the tree structures you and Ross found the day you had your most recent encounter. Do you think Dogmen make tree structures the same way Sasquatch do?
I'm not sure. I used to think that. I really did. I think that they're perfectly capable of it. I think that from what I've seen, as far as their anatomy, they have an opposable thumb, and therefore it's very possible for them to construct shelters or structures or anything like that. There's been a lot of publicity lately about structures that Sasquatch has given responsibility for, I guess. And I guess what I would say is that I think that what I've run across is that it's possible that Dogmen may actually be utilizing existing structures, because I can't see any difference in any of the structures I've seen. Or maybe possibly using caves or, like I said, existing areas that have been used before.
With all the Dogmen you've seen over the years, have you been able to tell if they've all been males, or is there a possibility some of them might have been female?
Well, that's another good question. I'll have to say it this way, that I have seen males that were definitely males. Their body structure has been very obvious to me that they were males that I was dealing with. And then there were other times when I couldn't tell the difference. Maybe there was a lot more fur or hair or distribution of such. There have been some that have been very small, but I couldn't tell whether that had anything to do with gender. May have just been age. I've never seen anything on the upper body that would tend to make me think that there was a female in the vicinity. I think that it may go back to what I was talking about, family groups traversing through the area using the green belts. And what I mean by the green belts, of course, the unconnected forest that's not separated by roadways. There seems to be quite a lot of ways that you can traverse this country without really ever having to cross much road. So I think that a lot of creatures use the green belts to get around. And it seems that when we have any kind of contact with Dogman, most of the time, unless it's utter surprise or some other reason, it's just a big, scary, terrifying experience rather than a horribly violent one. And it may just be that they're trying to scare us away from their family groups.
While there are very few things we can play the glad game with when it comes to Dogmen, one thing we can play that game with is the fact they don't seem to be as dangerous as they look like they'd be. If they were, it wouldn't be safe to go anywhere near the woods.
No, I think you're right, and I think that if that was the case, we would definitely hear about it.
Oh yeah, in short order too. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Dave, but before we do, what's this I hear about you running from a farmer who had a shotgun that was loaded with salt?
I wasn't going to get into that. That went back to the last time we were talking. I was researching in northern Pennsylvania, and it really ties in with what I always say about field work. If you're out in the world investigating, especially in rural areas, it's a really good idea to trespass as little as possible or not at all. If you're in an urban area, it's not really much of a problem, but you're not going to have a lot of investigation in urban areas. I'm not going to say you're not going to have any, because I know that that's taken place. But if you're out in the rural areas of any area, you really want to be careful that you don't wander onto people's property. Most of the time, somebody may just tell you to move on, or you're on my property, get out of there. But every once in a while, you're going to get somebody that's going to be a little bit more forceful about it. And Doug and I were out there. We were north of Bangor, north of Nazareth, up in the hills there. And I'll tell you, it scared the crap out of us. This guy came out and he just let go with his shotgun from a pretty good distance. And we took off, I'll tell you that. I thought he was shooting at us, with buckshot or whatever. And later on, I found pellets of salt in my clothes, in my jacket, and I realized what he was doing. Many years ago, when I was a lot younger, I ran into the same issue, but that time I found out how much the salt stings when it's laying in the abrasion made by the pellet on the skin. So it's definitely not something you want to tangle with.
Oh, I'd say not. Yeah, sounds like that old boy not too far from Nazareth was playing for keeps.
Yeah, well, at least it was salt.
Yeah, thank goodness. Well, thanks again so much for coming back on the show, Dave. As you know, if you have any other encounters, you're more than welcome to come back on the show and tell us about it.
I appreciate that, Vic. I know I will do that.
Well, that sounds good to me. Well, thanks again so much for your time. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.